In true crime, people focus on the word crime. What happened to a person to lead them up to a way of life where they commit an act that resulted in a judicial sentence, to be one of the thousands of those that are incarcerated. But in this portion of the podcast, I want to highlight success stories. Those who may have done time in the correctional system, but have come out of it and are thriving. The rate of recidivism in most states is staggering, though some will change their verbiage in order to lower their numbers. The fact is, a large number of individuals, once in the penal system, stay in the system. So why not celebrate those successes instead of minimizing? Bring a light to an arena often overshadowed and darkened. To let others know you aren't lost just because you have a state identification number. Your name can be synonymous with good. It just takes some work. As I gather these stories, I will attempt to air them midweek as a separation from the regular true crime series. I hope everyone enjoys hearing these as much as I have during the interviews. The first few of them are people who have not only successfully reintegrated back into society, a feat in itself, but sought out ways to help others, making it their life's work. With that, hey all, and welcome back to There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani, and today's episode is the one in which I interview Martin Lockett. Enjoy.
Hi,
Hi.
Leilani.
Leilani, yep.
Hi, Martin. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. I'm glad this worked out. Yes. All right. Hi.
Hi, perfect. Well, you are the first of these kind of interviews. So we're going to see kind of how it goes. I got in touch with George, which is how I got your information.
hmm
He works at the hospital with us and is just this amazing kind of guy that we deal with all the time. And he learned about my podcast and kind of how I was talking to guys that were still incarcerated. And he's like,
Okay.
you should do some success stories. I'm like, okay, well, I'd have to find them.
They
Like,
are
I don't
out
have this
here.
network.
I assure
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. He's like, I was like, I don't have this network already available. And he's like, well, I do. He's like, these people might talk to you. So
Yeah.
you were
Yeah.
one of the first names he gave me.
Awesome. All right. I am honored and thrilled.
Yeah. And I'm excited to get to put like a good spin on, true crime's always like very negative, usually. And so it's going to be nice to kind of put like the good side, like things can get better. So
Yes.
I'm pretty
Yes.
excited for that.
Likewise. Likewise. Thank you.
Of course. So, to start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, kind of younger years, maybe what kind of got you incarcerated, and then we'll go in from there.
Sure. So I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in the 80s. And, I know people think about Portland today is like, keep Portland weird and the naked bike ride and all that good fun stuff. It was not that in the 80s. It was very, very impoverished in Northeast Portland, North and Northeast Portland. It was there were gangs coming up from California fighting for territory. It was the height of the crack epidemic. Drive-by shootings were happening every other night. It was not a good place. However, I'm very pleased to say that I had two very loving parents in our household. My dad worked his whole life until he passed away to support our family. Back then, my mom stayed home to take care of us kids. I have a twin brother and then two older sisters, so there was we were a family of six. And things were pretty average for me, pretty normal until I got to high school. So I was a pretty shy kid throughout my pre-adolescent and adolescent years. And when I got to high school, it was such an overwhelming time for me, and no kid wants to find themselves by themselves. So I kind of gravitated to other kids who happened to live in my neighborhood, but I had never met. And as a 45-year-old man now, I think likely because my parents tried everything they could to, keep us from hanging out with these kids. But I started hanging out with these guys, and before I knew it, I was, skipping a class here, skipping a class there. When I was 14, I had my first sip of alcohol at a party, and I remember how much I absolutely loved it, frankly, because it was almost like, it was like this miracle liquid that allowed me to finally, shed my inhibitions and open up and talk to people more freely, especially when it came to girls, right? I was so nervous. And this allowed me to not be that nervous, shy, timid Martin. And so that was my kind of initial infatuation with alcohol. That
Mhm.
persisted for the next 2 years. Around age 16, things took kind of a darker turn. I started to drink not just in social settings, but I would drink in isolation more and more. I would, kind of come home from school. I remember come home from school at 16 years old, lock myself in my room, drink 40-ounce beers, and listen to sad music, right? At 16 years of age, because at this point, I'm starting to really struggle internally with some issues around my identity. As a black kid growing up, in this poverty-stricken area, but wanting more for my life. I wanted to go to U of O and become an architect because I love to draw and basically make it out of the hood. But I also inwardly did not see that as a real possibility for me because everyone in my neighborhood, either worked blue collar jobs, nothing wrong with blue collar jobs. Believe me, that's, hardworking folks is backbone of America, but basically like struggling to get by. Whereas my middle class white counterparts in high school, they got cars when they turned 16 and they lived in neighborhoods with manicured lawns and clean streets, and their dad worked downtown and wore a suit on Tuesdays. And so it was just a much different world. And so internalizing this low sense of self and feeling that my blackness was going to always hinder me from like really achieving in life caused me to get into a really dark place. And so that's when my drinking became more and more, and it was for a much different reason than just wanting to loosen up at a party. And so that's when my alcoholism set in. And ultimately culminated with a fatal car crash. Because by this time, so I'm 24 years old now. I'm working. I'm going to Portland Community College to get a degree. I am living with my girlfriend in Vancouver, Washington. I'm paying all my bills, and so life from the outside perspective looked okay for me at 24 years old, but
Mhm.
I'm still drinking every day. I'm still trying to mask these issues. And so after drinking and driving all day and night on New Year's Eve of 2003, I sped through a red light in Northeast Portland. I crashed into a car. I killed two people. I severely injured a third person, and I am hauled away on 2 counts of manslaughter in the first degree, which, if you know about mandatory minimum sentencing laws in the state of Oregon, those are considered person-to-person violent crimes, each carrying a mandatory minimum of 10 years, day for day. And then there was a person who also was severely injured in the crash, so I also was charged with assault too. For his injuries, which is also a Measure 11 crime, mandatory minimum. So I know when I get booked in on these charges that I am going to go away for a really, really, really long time. And so that was kind of the beginning of my journey that started over about what 21 years ago now.
Yeah. So from 16 to 24, you were drinking. You
Mhm.
still made it through high school, it sounds like. Got into college. You were
So
doing
no, no, so I did not graduate high school. I ended up getting a GED,
okay.
and then was just
I'm just
working.
curious if we functioned the whole time.
Yeah, yeah, no. So actually, and I can back up a little bit. I actually went to prison when I was 19. I went to prison for 3 years for an armed robbery. And then when I got out, I was 22 and was living in my parents' house and started to want to like, get my life together. So I got my GED in prison the first time. I got out. I started going to community college. I wanted to become a nurse, so I started going to Portland Community College. I worked at a warehouse. I was going to church, not drinking, doing all the stuff the right way. That lasted for about 6 months. And then I started hanging out with some of my buddies who were actually going to clubs and having fun and meeting women and all this cool stuff. And so I thought in my 22-year-old brain at that point, I thought that I could hang out in these social settings and not drink and, still have a good time and, be a young person and do all this stuff. But, I tell people now that, the saying goes, if you hang out in the barbershop long enough, eventually you're going to get a haircut. So that's what happened. I'm hanging out in these club settings, and eventually I started drinking again. And at that point, it was like I had never stopped drinking for those 3 years I was in prison. So now I'm drinking every day, and I'm driving, even though I'm working and going to school and doing all the things. I'm still, living very recklessly, with my drinking and driving.
Okay. When you were in the first time and you got your GED, was that difficult to obtain, or was it something that they kind of helped you with?
It actually, so I was never, I mean, I felt like I was always bright in school. In the classes where I applied myself, I did really well. I enjoyed English class. I was in advanced art for 3 of the 4 years in high school. That's the one class I didn't skip. Like I was there every day. Um, and there were other classes, like history. I really enjoyed his. So if I was interested, I did well. So when I buckled
Mhm.
down to focus on my GED, I got it in like 5 or 6 months with very little tutor. I passed all 5 tests, and then I became a tutor. Became a tutor, and I was helping folks incarcerated to get their GEDs as well.
Okay. So not hard to kind of get into the program. That's good,
No,
at
no,
least.
no, not at
Okay.
all. And then when I was going to community college, I did okay, but I'm also drinking at this time as well. So like I didn't have
Hmm.
the greatest grades. I was kind of, BC average, because I'm still drinking and trying to, function and but also do well academically. And it just doesn't work too well when you're drinking every day.
Sure. So we, after the car crash, you enter the system. Where do you end up?
So they send me to Pendleton. So I take a plea bargain. I'm in the county jail for a year. So let me just say, so the pivotal point in this story happens about 3 or 4 days after the crash. And so I'm in my cell and I'm just trying to wrap my head around everything that happened that night. And if somebody sliced the Oregonian newspaper underneath my door, and I don't know why, because I didn't ask anybody to see a paper, but I figured there must be something in there important for me to read, and so I pick it up and I start to thumb through this paper, and I see my picture on the front page of the Metro section. And so I'm reading these paragraphs, and as I'm reading each paragraph, the lives of my victims are starting to unfold. And so I learned through this article that these people have a really, really compelling story. And their story was that the two people that died were in long-term recovery. One had 16 years clean, one had 17 years clean. They were very active in the recovery community in Portland. They would watch women's children so ladies could attend AA and NA meetings. They were volunteers with Volunteers of America. They were connected to Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Like they were, all in with helping people get their lives on track in a way that they had 16, 17 years prior, respectively. The night that this happened, they were actually returning home from a clean and sober New Year's Eve party when they
Mhm.
were ultimately struck and killed by a drunk driver. And so the columnist he called it a palpable irony. I'll never forget that terminology. He said it's a palpable irony that these people who had devoted their lives to help people get clean and sober would have theirs taken by a drunk driver. And then he said at the end of the article a phrase that changed my life forevermore. He said, perhaps the person they will have ended up helping the most is the man who's charged with killing them. And it was such a profound statement. There's no way I could understand what he meant in that moment because again, I'm 3, 4 days removed from the crash. I know the law well. I know I'm going to go to prison for about 20 years. What is he talking about? This situation could possibly help me, right? Like I'm thinking like my life is over, right?
Mhm.
But it was also a phrase that I could not ignore. So I became determined to figure out what that phrase was supposed to mean for my life. And so for the next several months, I remember I kind of got back to my spiritual roots. I started praying about, revelation into this phrase and what it was supposed to mean and how I was supposed to apply it. It was almost like I meditated on it. I would hear it when I woke up in the morning. I would hear it when I'm eating chow. I would hear it, when I'm out there walking the little concrete space they had available for us to get exercise in. And I couldn't figure it out. And then it was like maybe 6 or 7 months into this event in the county jail that it finally came to me that the only way this tragedy will not be in vain is if I carry on these people's legacies. If I devote the rest of my natural life to doing everything I possibly can to help people who are struggling in addiction so that something like this, won't ever happen again. And so I said, okay, I think that the easiest way to do that is to become a substance abuse counselor, right? So I'm going to put all my energy and effort into getting an education and applying, to be a substance abuse counselor. So a few months later, I took a plea bargain for 17 and a half years, day for day, measure 11. I get sent to Pendleton, which is in Eastern Oregon, and I would be there for the next 9.5 years or so. But when I got there, I signed up to become a tutor since I had done that the previous sentence. So I figured that's a way to get into the educational space where I could find out if any college classes would be available. And so I did that. And at the time, they were offering one college class that you could take per term. And so I signed up to do that. And I figured, well, I got to start somewhere, right? And so I'm taking these classes that are not really geared toward like counseling, but it's kind of your basics like, writing 121 and, humanities in perspective and history and things like that. And so I did that for the next 3 years, tutoring guys for their GED studies. And then I lose my dad. My dad passes away very unexpectedly. But in that happening, I was able to get enough money through his life insurance policies and his pension and things like that to then start to take distance education courses, correspondence courses from like Louisiana State University and Indiana University, and was able to parlay all of that into a bachelor's from Colorado State, Pueblo in 2013. And then 3 years later, uh, graduated with a master's in psychology from California Coast University, and so that was kind of my educational journey while I was incarcerated.
So for the single classes that you take there, are they like, is there a teacher that comes in and you're in a classroom environment?
Yes, exactly. So it's through a program they have. It's called the New Directions Educational Project. It's only offered at the Eastern Oregon, as far as I know, the Eastern Oregon Correctional Institution in Pendleton. So they actually have professors come down from the local community college, which is Blue Mountain Community College in Pendleton, and they would come to the prison twice a week for 3 hours each time. It was a 3 credit course. So yeah, they would come down twice a week to do the class. And yeah, we would do the classes and do homework and do a final, and it was a college course with about 12 to 15 adults in custody per class.
Okay. And for the distance classes, how do those work?
So yeah, so I have family and an amazing fiance who would uh she would basically, or they would contact the school and pay for the course because I let them manage my money because obviously, I needed it to be out there, not in prison. So only so much commissary you can get with that much money. So they would then pay for the classes for me, and then the school would then send me the study guide and the assignments and all of that, and then my family would order the books from Amazon that I needed, the textbooks, have those sent in. So I'm doing the courses independently at this point, and would mail in the assignment, and then they would mail it back with the grade, and then so we would do that, and then when it came to midterms and final exams, then again, my family would have to, or my fiance would let the school know that I was ready for my midterm. Then they would send it directly to the education department. The education department would have to proctor it for me, and then they would mail it back to the institution, and then it would be graded. And that's what we did for the midterms and finals. And so with those, I got comfortable to do like 2 and 3 classes at one time. So I've had a pretty heavy load of college courses as well as still working as a GED tutor during the day to help the guys get their GEDs as well.
Well, that's really cool. So you got your bachelor's.
So I got my bachelor's and then I went on to get my master's. And then, so that was 2016 that I got my master's. And then I knew I still needed, in order to to become certified as a counselor, I knew I needed 1,000 clinical hours of practicum, right? And so there was only one medium custody prison, and I was medium custody because I still had like 5.5 years left on my sentence, and you need to be under 4 years to go to a minimum security facility in Oregon. So I got transferred to this prison that has the one substance abuse treatment program there. And I meet with the clinical supervisor and say, hey, my ultimate goal is to become certified as a substance abuse counselor in Oregon, but I need 1,000 clinical hours. Is there any way that I could work under your supervision to get those hours? And he said, well, you don't really like meet the criteria because like you still have 5.5 years left. And technically you're supposed to be under a year on your sentence to even go through his program as a participant. And
Mhm.
so he said, I'll tell you what, he said, I will go to my boss, the administration for DOC and see, because he knew that I had invested so much of my own money and time and gotten this master's degree. So he knew that I was dedicated. And so he went to his boss, basically told him what I was looking to do. They cut a bunch of red tape and they allowed me to enter into his program first as a participant to go through the program and learn the curriculum and be a part of, the recovery process, and then work as a mentor to get the clinical hours needed. So I did that for the next 2 years from 2017 to 2019. I did that and I was able to get certified first as a recovery mentor in 2018, and then I got certified in 2019 as a substance abuse counselor by the certifying board in Oregon. And then so around that time, then I transferred to another prison to finish off the last 2.5 years of my sentence. And I started telling my story at DUI victim impact panels within the prison setting, where they would bring in people from the outside who had lost a loved one to a DUI driver, and they would tell this just a gut-wrenching story about how they lost a child or a spouse or a sibling, or they themselves were permanent maimed from being hit by a drunk driver. And then so they would tell their story, and then one of us on the inside who was there for the same type of crime would tell our story. Obviously, being fully remorseful and taking full accountability and all of that, because it's a really healing space, as you can imagine, that this was happening in. There were probably about 50 adults in custody in attendance, and like tears were flowing and hugs were, plentiful. And it was just a really healing space. And so when I started telling my story in those settings, I knew once I got out a couple years later, I was going to want to continue that. So when I got out in 2021, the summer of 21, I started, reaching out to DUI victim impact panels to tell my story. So I started doing that. I recorded my story on YouTube, actually, when I was still in prison before the pandemic happened. When the pandemic happened and everything went to online, then these DUI victim impact panels and traffic safety classes were looking for online content. And so they came across my video. So my video was in wide circulation before I even got out. So when I got out, that gave me opportunities to start speaking publicly, telling my story. And then that evolved to me speaking in high schools. And I did a college tour in New York about a year and a half or so ago, the Save a Life tour, where I would tell my story with other folks. I started getting recruited to speak at a lot of conferences, a lot of law enforcement conferences, traffic safety conferences. I got one next month, or actually now this month. This is March, so I'll be in Pittsburgh doing that. I speak at highway safety classes. So I probably speak. I just did 2 panels this morning remotely. I probably speak at like 6 to 8 panels remotely every month. And then I do probably like 4 to 5 conferences a year. And I do, 5, 6 high schools a year before prom and graduation, when we know a lot of kids tend to drink and drive subsequently, and so they bring me in to get the word out about that. So life is definitely very busy and active, but frankly, I wouldn't have it any other way at this point. So I'm just really grateful for all the opportunities I've gotten.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a really good success story coming out of one bad situation, which is amazing. Were there any limitations once you got out transitioning into kind of the civilian role of all of this? Like, was there anything that blocked you? What was like the hardest thing I think you had to overcome?
Well, I mean, obviously, when you're tucked away for 17 and a half years, technology has advanced significantly. I remember when I went to prison, the phone that I had was the little Nokia little touch button phone. Like there was no texting and
Yeah.
pictures and all that stuff. So like that was all new. There was no apps on phones. Like you had to call anywhere you needed to, talk to someone. You couldn't go onto an app and just do your business. Um, I think MySpace was the only social media platform when I went to prison. So just navigating all of that since I've been out was certainly a challenge. And you don't have any internet access inside, so there's no way to really get practice with navigating like, how to download apps and how to, usernames and passwords, like all that stuff was new to me. Even having I had never had an email address prior to prison. So learning all the technology was definitely a challenge. And the fact that I still can't drive, I can't have a license until 2029 as a result of this. So I have to Uber everywhere I go. So obviously that gets, expensive.
Mhm.
Thankfully with my job, so I live in Pennsylvania now. I fly to Portland every month for a week or so. So I was promoted to director. So let me back up. When I got out, because I have my CADC, my Certified Alcohol and Drug Counseling credential, I was able to get a remote job as a CADC case manager, right? Through Lines for Life, which is a mental health, substance abuse, suicide prevention organization based out of Portland. So I was able to do that job remotely where I would take calls on it was called the Telephone Addiction Recovery Center line. It was the Measure 110. If folks are from Oregon, they know the Measure 110 line was the line that people who were cited for a small amount of drugs, it was decriminalized. They would call us and we would do a screening with them and then offer them resources, give them a certificate. They go to court and they have the fine waived. So I was hired for that. I did that for a couple years, and then when that went away, then I got promoted to director of cultural engagement, where I now every month go to Portland. I lead a small team into communities of color as well as corrections to do trainings and workshops around mental health and suicide prevention and substance abuse prevention. So that's my day job. So luckily, when I'm in Portland and I'm running around here and there, my job pays for all of the Uber fees. But when I'm
Mhm.
here at home and I'm, going to, New York or, Maryland or Texas or wherever to do speaking engagements, then that comes out of my pocket, right?
Mhm.
And so it's just, that can certainly be a challenge economically, but it is part of the price of having committed this crime. So
Mhm. Um, I was gonna ask, because you said you were part-time in Portland. When you first got out, did you have to go back to Portland for a time? And then
yeah,
was that difficult at all? Because if you're back in the same kind of environment, did that offer any temptation? Did you have any issues, or were you just set?
yeah, no, it's a good question. So I was in Portland for the first 6 months, staying with my family, with my brother and his wife in the same house that we grew up in, that my dad bought in 1982. Um, I had firmly set boundaries long before I got out, letting people know that like I'm not going to be drinking. I cannot drink. Do not offer me a drink. And then I made sure that I didn't go to places where alcohol was or where I knew
Mhm.
bad behavior was. Obviously, Portland is much different today than it was back then. So, as far as like the, heavy gang activity and all of that, I guess that stuff has kind of been pushed out to what they call the numbers or like the Gresham area, which is weird because back in the day, like it was only white people, affluent white people who lived out there, and now it's like not. So it's interesting. But back in Northeast Portland, it's just much different these days. So no, the temptation was really predicated on how much I exposed myself to being in certain areas, and I just wouldn't put myself in those predicaments. Like I've still not been into a bar today. I have no reason to go into a bar.
Hmm.
I am comfortable today. I've been out little over 3.5 years now. I'm comfortable being around people who do drink, like at somebody's house or something like that. Um, because it's just not a part of my life. And like I play the tape all the way through, as we say in recovery, where even though there might be some triggering moments where like I think, man, having one beer would be nice, to, kind of loosen up, relax. But like I also play the tape through and know that like the way that this story begins is not the way it's going to end, right? Because the
Hmm.
last time I drank, the story ended very, very tragically, right? Those are the facts. So regardless of what I think or what my addicted brain wants to tell me about how wonderful one or two beers would be, I know the actual reality of my life is that I've never had a healthy relationship with alcohol. And that the last time I drank, something really, really tragic happened. And so I let the facts supersede whatever the feelings may be in that moment.
Hmm. So you do multiple different things other than your normal job. You do the panels and such. Is there one part of that you find is more rewarding or than the other, where you see the biggest impact of kind of all of this?
Truthfully, I think it's all one big bucket. I think it's all one big bucket of service, of service to humanity. And so as much as I thoroughly enjoy speaking at DUI victim impact panels to first time DUI offenders and letting them know that if you continue on this path, something really, really bad will happen. Listen to my story and take heed and reverse course. That is very, very rewarding when people come up to me afterwards and shake my hand and thank me and tell me that they're going to become a designated driver going forward and they're going to, never do this again. And, that all of these things is really rewarding. It's also equally rewarding when I go into a prison setting and I'm amongst people that I actually did time with. And this time I'm wearing a shirt and a tie and slacks and fancy shoes. And I get to deliver a training that will enable them to be stronger in their mentorship while they're there, right? With the course that we're delivering to them, and they likewise tell me that they really appreciate me coming back in and not forgetting them, and I'm an example of what they can do when they get out and to show success, and that is equally rewarding. So I'm again, I feel incredibly blessed. Um, in the work that I'm given the opportunity to do. A lot of people say that I have to go to work, and I'm like, I get to go to work. I'm so
Yeah.
excited to go to work and to do these things privately, to be able to share my story and hopefully help people along the way.
Yeah. Speaking of sharing your story, is your YouTube still up? Is there a place where people can watch that? And then do you have
Sure.
any other kind of content places that people should go to find you?
Absolutely. Yeah, my YouTube video, there's a couple videos there still widely circulated in panels throughout the country today. So if they just type in my name, Martin Lockett, when you go to YouTube, those videos will automatically pop up. You can also follow me. I'm only on Instagram, but all of my content is there. So I love to connect with people on Instagram, and then I have my website, which is martinlockett.com, where you can see different types of speeches that I give and just read more about my story if you're interested. And then my books are also, I published two books while I was incarcerated, both my memoir as well as a series of blogs. I was a regular blogger for a site dedicated to amplifying voices from those inside, and so I published 100 blogs about my experience in day-to-day life in prison and how I was able to overcome a lot of the chaos that goes on inside prison to ultimately get to where I am today. So.
Yeah. Before we wrap this up, is there anything else that I missed? Anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I just really appreciate this platform and how you are amplifying voices from primarily folks inside who have a lot to say, There's been a lot of growth from people who made really poor choices when they were young and in their addiction, but their lives are entirely different today. And I just hope that when people hear these stories, that they start to if they've written these folks off, that they start to believe in humanity again and know that people are capable of redemption and deserve a second chance in life, sometimes a third chance.
Perfect. I don't know where my camera went. It ran away.
I see that.
It just it just like cut out on me. I think this is what happened last time. The dog decided,
Oh no.
and now it gets shaky and I forgot my extra camera. But great to hang out and listen to your story. I really love hearing the success of, maybe one, two bad decisions in life and, coming out on the other side and still making something of yourself and, not kind of falling back into the system and just recidivism is huge around here. So it's great to hear when that's not the case. So I appreciate you taking the time today.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for having me. And it was a real honor to be able to tell my story on your platform. So thank you.
Of course. Thanks, Martin.